All right, friends, a formal welcome. This is Daily Power Parsha, and today is January 21st, 2021. All right, so we have a very interesting and compelling conversation today. Today is Thursday, so we're going to cover the fifth reading of the Torah portion of Bo, as you can see. All right.
Oh.
Sorry? Oh, I'm going to mute everybody so we have a nice clean background. Okay, so let's jump in. Torah reading for Bo, fifth reading, Exodus chapter 12, verse 21. Now, before we start, we give you a little bit of context. So from the beginning of this week's Torah portion, we read about the eighth plague of locusts, the ninth plague of darkness, and the warning for plague number 10, death of the firstborn. Go. And before the death of the firstborn, God tells Moses, tell the people that they should start bringing the Paschal lamb into their house on day number 10 of Nisan and bring it as an offering and eat as a meal on the afternoon and evening, the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan and the night of the 15th. All right, here we go. So Moses summoned all the elders of Israel, and he said to them, draw forth or buy for yourselves sheep for your families and slaughter the Passover sacrifice. So draw forth would mean if you already have it, or buy if you need an animal, if you need a Paschal lamb, then go ahead and pick one up at the market. Okay, and you shall take a bunch of hyssop and immerse it in the blood that is in the basin. So when you sacrifice the animal, so collect the blood in a basin, in a bowl, and then you take this hyssop and you shall extend to the lintel and to the two doorposts the blood that is in the basin, right? So we read about God's command to Moses to tell the people that we read yesterday when God told this to Moses to tell people. And here today, Moses is actually delivering the message. So slaughter the animal, collect the blood, dip that plant into, or whatever, that vegetation into the blood, and paint the doorposts and the top of the door. And you shall not go out, right? Don't leave your house. Quarantine, right? This is the first Jewish quarantine in your home. Don't go out that night, any man from the entrance of his house until morning. So that night, the night of what would become the first Seder, right? In Egypt. So make sure you put the blood on the doorposts and on the top of the door, the lintel, and don't leave your home. What's going to happen? This is all Moses telling the elders, telling the leaders of the children of Israel. The Lord will pass to smite the Egyptians, and he will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and the Lord will, finally we have it. The Lord will pass over. There you go. Hence the name. The Lord will pass over the entrance to the Jewish homes, and he will not permit the destroyer, that would mean the angel of death, to enter your houses to smite you. And lest you think this is a one-time deal because of plague number 10, death of the firstborn, lest you think that it's just this one time that we're going to do this. No, you shall keep this matter as a statute for you and for your children forever. In other words, every year on the anniversary of the Exodus, which we know is Passover, you should also bring the offering, the Paschal lamb, and eat the lamb with the matzah and the maror. Of course, I don't need to mention, but I'll mention it anyway. We don't have a temple, and we can't offer sacrifices. So we do everything except for the lamb, except for the sacrifice. We don't do the korban, we don't do the sacrifice, but we do the matzah and the maror and the other stuff. All right. And it shall come to pass, verse 25, when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he spoke, that you shall observe this service. Yeah, you see that? It shall come to pass when you enter the land. This is referring to Israel, right? When you enter Israel, then you shall observe the service. This becomes very important. This becomes the reason why the Jewish people did not observe the Paschal lamb while they were traveling in the desert, except for year number 2. In other words, on the first anniversary of Passover, they brought a carbon Pesach, they brought a Paschal lamb, but in the years subsequent to that, until they entered the land of Israel, they did not bring the sacrifice. Why not? You see here in verse 25 that the mitzvah only kicks in once you enter the land. Of course, they had to do it in Egypt, but it's basically Egypt and then see you in Israel. And it will come to pass, verse 26. I mentioned this last night in our Torah studies class, how the story of the Exodus is filled with selfies. It's filled with, let's document this to look back at a later date. So look what Moses says. This is Moses telling the elders of Israel before plague number 10. They're still slaves officially in Egypt. And it will come to pass, if your children say to you, years later, if your children will say to you, what is this service to you? In other words, if they're going to ask you at a future Passover experience at the Seder, what are we doing? What's going on here? Why are we eating lamb with matzah and maror? What's going on? Aha, you have to know the answer. So you shall say, Moses tells the elders to tell the people, you shall say, again, not now. Now everyone knows what's going on. We're trying to leave this place. But years later, in Israel, in freedom, right? If your children are going to wonder, what are you doing? This is the answer. You shall say, it is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord. Why? Why we bring a Passover sacrifice to the Lord? Because for he passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, and he saved our houses. And the people kneeled. Okay, fine. So that's the answer. And then what happened? Moses concludes his message. So the people kneeled and prostrated themselves. It's a sign of being taken by the message, by this mitzvah. So the children of Israel went and did as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. So basically, God told Moses, Moses told the elders told the people, and the people followed the orders. They did what was requested of them, collecting the lamb and preparing themselves for that epic night of the Exodus. Okay, it's a short reading, but there's a few things that I want to point out. Some things related to what we explored today, everything related to what we explored today, but some details also that we mentioned yesterday. So a few very important notes. Number one, we know in the commentaries, tradition, etc., that the Egyptians worshipped the sheep, the lambs, etc. They worshiped these animals. And so for the Jew to take the lamb and marketplace and parade for all the Jews, all the Jewish households, to take a lamb and parade it through the streets would evoke questions from their neighbors. Question would be, what are you doing with the lamb? And the Jews would answer, right? They would say, oh, we're binding it to our bedposts to get ready for the night of the 10th plague. And on that afternoon, right before the night of the 10th plague, we're going to offer it as a sacrifice to our God. That would create a lot of consternation and anger in the eyes of the Egyptians. If you recall, Moses told Pharaoh, we read this a few days ago, when Pharaoh asked Moses after one of the plagues, plague 8, I think, or plague 9, he said to Moses, you know what? Here's what I'll do. I'll let you want to worship God? You want to leave Egypt so you can worship God? Do me a favor. Worship God right here, right? Bring your offerings, your sacrifice, whatever you want to do it here in Egypt. Moses says we can't. Why? Because the Egyptians worship these animals. And so if we're going to offer these animals to our God, if we're going to offer what they consider their God to our God, it's going to be a whole kerfuffle. That's what Moses says. But here, the Jewish people are asked to do exactly that. They're asked to take a sheep, parade it through the marketplace, parade it through the streets. And if being asked by the Egyptians, what are you doing? You can't hide. Every Jewish family, there's millions, right? Or hundreds, many hundreds of thousands of households, all collecting sheep, lambs. So how are you going to get out of it? So you're gonna share the truth that you're taking it for a sacrifice, and it's going to raise a lot of animosity from the Egyptians. So the commentaries explain that this was a way before the Exodus even, breaking the grip of the Egyptians on the children of Israel and the Jewish people. In other words, there's two forms, there are multiple forms, but two primary forms of what we would call slavery or enslavement. One is physical and one is psychological, right? One is physically being locked up in a place, God forbid. The other is being under someone's control, under someone's dominion, where even if physically you can walk out, but psychologically or emotionally, right, on those levels, you feel trapped by the other. You can't do what you want to do. You can't say what you want to say. You can't think how you want to think because of this pressure or this condition. That's another form of slavery. So what we're reading about here is where God, again, in a powerful way, is trying to break that hold from the Jewish people. God tells Moses to tell the people, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take a lamb. You're going to parade the streets. And when they ask you why, you're going to tell them the truth. And when they get angry, you're not going to care. You know why? Because you don't follow their orders anymore. You are liberated. You are you're listening to me. You're not listening to the local Egyptians. You're not anymore under their control. This is psychologically and emotionally breaking the grip of the Egyptians on the Jewish people. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? That idea? It's the idea of a stolz, of a strength to look at your oppressor and say, you don't own me. You don't own me. This is what I'm going to do. And whether you like it or not, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm thinking. This is what I'm saying. And that's it. Takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of guts, takes a lot of bravery. And even saying bravery and guts and courage is underselling it because it takes much more than that. You and I can't imagine what it would have been like for those Jewish people after hundreds of years of being under the Egyptians, right? And after decades of harsh slavery, to look at them and say, not anymore. This is what we're doing. We know it's your God. We know you worship it. You know you don't want us to do it. Doesn't matter. This is what we're doing. This is how we're rolling. It's unbelievably courageous. So that's one point I wanted to mention. It's not just taking a lamb and bringing it as an offering and painting the blood on the doorpost. It's much more than that. It's an act of defiance. It's an act of standing up to your oppressor. It's an unbelievable act. By the way, you should know that this conversation with the Egyptians triggered essentially an Egyptian civil war. Because when the Egyptians asked about the lambs, and the Jews told them about the sacrifice, and they told them about the 10th plague, so what happened was the firstborn Egyptians actually started a civil war against Pharaoh and Egypt to try to get the Jewish people out. And it didn't work because the 10th plague still unfolded and the Jews weren't liberated until after the 10th plague had passed or had hit. But that caused some infighting amongst the Egyptian populace. Okay, another point that I wanted to mention, and this is, I'm going to share my screen again. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Hey, Ariella. Who didn't I mention? Matt, Donna. Okay, so let me jump back into the text. I want to share with you something from yesterday, because in the preparation of the Paschal Lamb, and I pointed this out, but I didn't share an insight on it, but I wanted to do that today. So it talks about not only bringing slaughtering the Paschal lamb and then eating it, but it talks about eating it. It talks about how to cook it or how to prepare it. Where is it? It's over here, roasted. Take a look. Take a look at verse 8. On this night they shall eat the flesh. So you're supposed to eat the lamb. It's considered to be a carbon, a sacrifice. It wasn't a temple, by the way, in Egypt, right? There wasn't a Jewish temple in Egypt. It was they slaughtered the animal and then they roasted it, they ate it, and that was considered to be an offering. Now, they ate it, though, it was meant to be prepared, roast over the fire. And if you notice, the Torah, God is very specific about how to prepare it. You shall not eat it rare or boiled in water, except roasted over the fire. It was meant to be, in essence, I don't know if they had a spit then, but roasted directly over fire. That's how it was meant to be prepared. And it begs the question, does it really matter, right? Does it really matter how you're preparing the Paschal lamb? Like, what if you prefer it sauteed? What if you prefer sauteed? I have a great sauteed lamb recipe. No, you can't saute it. You have to roast it. What's that? What's the idea of having to roast it, right?
Gets rid of the blood.
Get rid of the blood. Okay, that's one idea. Good, but it seems very specific. There's ways that you can get rid of the blood before, or cut out parts of the animal, like the liver that have the blood. You know, there's ways to do it. You know, they weren't yet given the laws of kashrut at that point. They didn't have those laws. They didn't have the laws of not eating blood, for example. So what's going on about the roasting? But you're right. The roasting would get rid. That's how we prepare liver, for example. It gets rid of the blood. But what's the idea? What's the deeper meaning of this roasting over the fire? So there is a mystical insight, a Kabbalistic and Hasidic insight on this that I'd like to share with you. So what is the difference between fire and water? Because you notice the Torah says, don't eat it rare, don't boil in water, you have to roast it over fire. So I want to contrast the boiling in water as opposed to roasting over fire. So let's talk about the difference between the elements of water and fire. All right, so let's talk about water and fire. So Kabbalah says, and by the way, these are two of the four primary elements of the world. So water, fire, earth, and wind. So water, by its nature, water settles down. Water collects. To give an example, well, it's more than collects. Water goes down by nature. So if you have a cup, right? If you have a cup of water, and then you poke a hole in the bottom, what's going to happen? The water is going to go down through the hole, right? And continue its descent down to the lowest place. If you have a hill and you pour water on the top of the hill, what's going to happen? It's going to go down. If you have a driveway, right, and you pour a bucket of water on top of the driveway and it's slanted, it's going to go down the driveway. Water always seeks the lowest point. That's the nature of water, right? That's its nature. If it can go lower, it'll go lower. Fire has a very different nature. Fire always goes up. Fire doesn't go down. Fire always goes up. Now, where do we see this? You light a fire and the flame flickers up. You take a candle, for example, you turn it sideways, the flame points up. You take the candle, you turn it upside down. The flame, well, I don't know if you should do this because it could get your hand, right? The flame will still go up. No matter what you do with the fire, it's always the flame is going to point upward. You can't get it down even if you tried. Fire by nature always seeks to go up. So that's a contrast right there. Water seeks by its nature to go down, and fire always seeks to go up. completely different natures. In our spiritual service, they represent two different modalities, both of which I should mention are kosher, but very different modalities. So the water modality is to feel, to seek, to be settled and complacent and satisfied and gathered. So just like water, which seeks to go down, so this is about a groundedness. This is about, being settled and being complacent and being satisfied and having things in a set fashion. That's what water represents. Fire represents, on the other hand, a restlessness of always seeking to go upward. Water seeks to go down and seeks that kind of, collecting downward, complacency, if you will. And fire is not complacent at all. Fire is restless. Fire is always seeking to go up and seeking to never satisfied, if you will. So we also find this in what water and fire do. Water takes particles. For example, if you mix water with flour, you make a dough out of it, right? So water takes different things and brings them together, coalesces them, brings them together as one. Water is a unifier. Fire is a divider. Fire splits things apart. Fire reduces a thing into ashes, into different pieces, right? So it separates. It takes one and separates it out into many, as opposed to water, which takes many and brings it into one. So fire and water are very different natures and very different effects. And in our spiritual service, fire and water represent two different modalities. There's the modality of feeling grounded and feeling settled and having your set system and program of what you're learning and what you're doing and how much you're praying and your groundedness in your divine connection. And that's important. It's important to be grounded. And that's the idea of water. And then fire represents not being satisfied, not being complacent, right? Taking what you had and reducing it to nothing. Got to start again from scratch, right? Reinventing oneself, always being restless. I haven't arrived. There's so much more that I could be doing. Fire represents that inner restlessness. So the Torah is teaching us something really powerful. Although typically, there's a place for both fire and water, right? We're supposed to be restless and want to strive higher. At the same time, there's also power in being settled and having a Seder, I don't mean a Passover Seder, having orderliness in our lives. On the night of Passover, it's different. You see, the night of Passover is about freedom. It's about redemption. It's about Exodus. It's about leaving the status quo. It's about leaving Egypt and go to a brand new place. And when we're leaving Egypt, when we're in that space of Exodus, there's no room for water to dampen our yearnings. It's all about the fire. It's all about yearning for something greater, something higher, something more transcendent than where we are right now. So whereas maybe 364 days of the year, give or take, right? The rest of the year, we have to balance our fire with our water and have moments of uplifting, but also moments of groundedness. On the night of Passover, God is telling us with the Paschal lamb offering and the cooking instructions, no cooking, the roasting instructions. God is saying on this night, on the night of Passover, the night of the Exodus, it's only fire. It's only roasting and fire. It's only that modality of transcendence and higher seeking. So that's a little bit of a mystical insight into the mitzvah to roast the Paschal lamb. One other point that I wanted to mention, and then we're going to close it out, is that the idea that the Paschal lamb was meant to be eaten within the household. So this wasn't, interestingly enough, it wasn't an offering that was brought on behalf of the entire people. It wasn't an offering brought by every individual. It was brought by families, by households. And the family was not large enough to finish the entire lamb, and you didn't want to have leftovers because it was supposed to be eaten that night. So then join up with another household. But it was household by household. And that itself is a powerful message as well. And this is the final message that I'll share today. The power of households and the power of families. From the beginning, the downfall happened through a disruption and a breakdown. When I say downfall, I mean the descent into Egypt. And the Egyptian exile began with a disintegration of the household, of the family, right? Joseph is sold as a slave by his brothers. And ultimately that ends up, that's what leads the Jewish people to end up in Egypt. Now, we could have other classes talk about the benefit of that, and that's wonderful. But for right now, let's speak in terms of Egyptian exile being a bad thing, and that all being caused by a breakdown of the family unit. Disharmony and disunity and disintegration of that family, where Joseph is being oppressed by his own flesh and blood, by his own brothers. And how incredibly perfect coming full circle is it that what triggers the Exodus and the end to the Egyptian night, families joining together and eating a meal together as a family, right? Again, think about the imagery. What's the catalyst for the Egyptian exile? It's a family being split, Joseph being sold as a slave. And what allows us to leave Egypt? Families coming together and having a Paschal lamb meal with matzah and maror and a good sandwich, right? A good matzah and lamb and lettuce or whatever it was, whatever they had then, sandwich. So something to think about when we think about the power of the family dynamic. It's not just a personal thing. It's a collective thing. It's a national thing. In other words, how our families go, so goes the world, if you will. So goes our nation. So goes our people. So the microcosm, in fact, macrocosm, and that's another powerful lesson from the story of the Exodus. Yeah, Ray, go ahead.
So there were how many people there?
So there were, shortly after the Exodus, the Torah counts about 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Now, the assumption is that there would be a similar number of women between 20 and 60, which then elevates the number to double, which is 1.2 million, plus children under 20, boys and girls, and men and women over 60. So if you count all of that, the estimates run somewhere between 2 and 3 million people.
So where'd they get all the lamb, the sheep?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a lot of sheep.
That's a lot of sheep.
A lot of lamb. I don't know, but there was some run on the lamb market. It was a bull market for lambs or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there were more households. Well, there weren't, 1 second. So there weren't 2-3 million households. The households, you would imagine, were closer to that 600,000 number, because the children don't have their own household, right? And the assumption is the women would be part of that would be a household with men, women, children, and even probably the elders would probably be in effect within one household. So, of that number, 600,000, I don't know, maybe half of that were households, right? If you figure a few adults per household, and also who knows how large the houses were, how crammed they were into the houses. I don't know. It's a good question. Either way, it was a lot of lamb. A lot of lamb was being consumed.
I think so.
Yeah, that night. Yeah, a lot of roasted lamb. Anyway, I imagine somebody, because Jews are always particular about food. Jews and food, right? It's a whole thing. But I can imagine some Jews saying to Moses, roasted lamb? I hate roasted lamb. What are you going to do? I eat roasted lamb and that's it. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I've got something. I hope I'm not going too far. Just it's one or two passages later, where it says it is a Pesach offering to Hashem, and there's a really good Rashi on that, because Rashi says the offering is called a Pesach because of the skipping and leaping. For the Holy One, blessed is he, skipped over the houses of Israel, which were among the houses of Egypt. He would jump from Egyptian to Egyptian, and the Israelite in the middle would escape any harm. And he goes on, he says, perform all of the aspects of the offering service for the sake of heaven, in a manner of skipping and jumping, in remembrance of its name, as it is called Pesach Skipping. So Pesach means skipping?
Pesach really means passing over, but there is a connotation of leaping over. And by the way, it's very much in concert. It very much works with the insight that I shared before about the fire and the roasting, because it's all about a quantum leap, if you will, right? It's about, God leaping over the houses, so to speak, right? And between you and me, does God have to jump over the house, right? Could he not float over it? But again, it's terminology, but the Torah uses that terminology about leaping. But for us, it was certainly a leap, right? To go from Egyptian slavery to freedom is, if that's not a quantum leap, I don't know what is, right? And the message is that in our lives, Passover is also about a time of quantum leap. It's not Passover right now, but certainly we can experience Passover anytime. It's easier on Passover, but the energy is always at our fingertips. In fact, that's why there's a mitzvah to mention the Exodus every single day. Every single day we mention the Exodus. Where? We do it, we append it. Append it? I think that's what it's called. Appendage it? No, not appendage. Append it to the Shema. In the Shema, there's a mention of the Exodus. And in our prayers, daily prayers, we always mention every day the Exodus. Exodus, Exodus, Exodus. Why? Right? Don't we have Passover for that? We don't mention the shofar every day. We do it once a year on Rosh Hashanah. Right? Why are we? Hanukkah is Hanukkah once a year. We celebrate Hanukkah. Why Exodus every day? Because on a spiritual level, every single day we're meant to take leaps in our lives. Now, it may not be as dramatic, as that original quantum leap, or on the anniversary every year of what we're, hopefully doing on Passover in our own lives, but at least on a small scale, sort of leap to get beyond a place that we feel stuck within. Anyway, that's an insight. Thank you, Mark, for sharing that, and for taking the leap, frankly, and sharing that. All right. It's great to see everybody. I want to wish you all a wonderful day. And Amir Hashem, hopefully the plan is to have Tanya tonight at 8. So please stay tuned for that class later tonight. Tanya study, Think Different, 8 p.m. Ray, Ella, Mark, and Donna, it's great to see you all. Have a wonderful day. Take care. All right. You too. Bye-bye.